The room fell silent as my mother slammed the folder down on the kitchen table. Her eyes locked on mine with that familiar mix of disdain and expectation, declaring that it was my duty as the youngest to take over the family business and all its obligations, no questions asked. My sister nodded along without a word, her agreement cutting deeper than any argument could, leaving me feeling utterly disposable in the home I'd helped build for years. The pain hit me like a wave, realizing this was just another way they saw me as the one to sacrifice everything while they reaped the benefits. And in that moment, I made the quiet choice to nod in agreement, stepping forward to sign the preliminary papers right there. But as I pressed the pen to the page, I knew this signature would unravel more threads than they could ever imagine. If you've ever felt trapped by family expectations that crush your own dreams, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments, what would you have done in that split second? I'd love to hear your thoughts. My name is Stella Freeman and I am 32 years old. Growing up in Salt Lake City, Utah, I'd always been the practical one in our family, the daughter who kept things running smoothly while everyone else chased their bigger ambitions or simply coasted along. Our family owned a mid-sized catering company that specialized in events around the valley, weddings, corporate gatherings, holiday parties, and for as long as I could remember, I'd been pulled into it, starting as a teenager helping with setups and deliveries after school. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and kept us in a comfortable house in the suburbs with views of the Wasatch Mountains that made the long hours feel a little less exhausting. My grandmother Elizabeth had founded the business decades ago with nothing but her recipes and determination, passing it down to my mother Gemma Harlow when she retired. And I'd assumed one day it would be shared fairly among us kids. But assumptions have a way of crumbling when reality sets in, especially when family ties start feeling more like chains. I met my husband, Brian Sutton, when I was 20, fresh out of community college with a certificate in business administration, working full-time as the office manager for the catering company. He was a vendor we used for linens and rentals, charming and ambitious, always talking about expanding his own supply business someday. We got married young at 22, and our son Levi arrived a year later, turning our lives into a whirlwind of diapers, client calls, and late-night inventory checks. My husband fit right into the family dynamic. At first, he'd help with big events, charm the clients, and even brainstorm ways to grow the company. My mother adored him, treating him like the son she never had, while my older sister Sharon, who was always more interested in her social life than spreadsheets, floated in and out, taking credit for successes without putting in the effort. My uncle, Thomas Elizabeth's brother, lived nearby and occasionally consulted on finances, but he was retired and mostly stayed out of the day-to-day drama. For years, I poured everything into that business, handling the books, coordinating with suppliers, managing staff schedules, and even stepping in to cook when we were shorthanded. It was unpaid overtime on top of my salary, but I did it because it was family, because my grandmother's voice echoed in my head about loyalty and building something lasting. My husband and I built a life around it too. Our home was a modest split level in a quiet neighborhood, close enough to the company warehouse for quick runs, and Levi grew up playing in the office, learning to fold napkins before he could tie his shoes. But cracks started showing around the time Levi turned 10. My mother began making decisions without consulting me, like taking out loans for new equipment or expanding into unprofitable areas. And my sister would back her up, saying I was too cautious, too stuck in the details. My husband, who'd started his own side ventures, pulled away gradually, leaving me to handle more while he pursued deals that never quite panned out. Then, about 4 years ago, I stumbled onto something that changed everything, though. I kept it buried deep at first. I was reconciling accounts late one night after an event, cross-checking invoices against bank statements when I noticed discrepancies, transfers to unfamiliar accounts, mounting interest payments that didn't match our known loans. Digging deeper over the next few weeks, I uncovered a mess that made my stomach turn. The business was saddled with over $1 million in debt from multiple lines of credit, unpaid vendors, and risky investments my mother had made in speculative real estate flips around the city. Worse, some of the loans were in my name. Forged signatures from years back when I'd trusted her with power of attorney for a minor expansion. The house we all gathered in for holidays, it had 2 additional mortgages taken out without my knowledge, totaling more than its current value in this fluctuating market. My grandmother's legacy wasn't a thriving enterprise. It was a sinking ship propped up by hidden borrowing and creative accounting. I confronted no one right away. Instead, I protected what was mine. My grandmother had left me a separate inheritance when she passed, a modest sum of $200,000 in a trust she'd set up specifically for me, emphasizing in her will that it was for my future alone, not to be mingled with family funds. I'd added to it over the years, from my salary rolling over a small retirement account, from a brief stint at another job, before fully committing to the catering company. Working quietly with my uncle, who knew a bit about trusts from his accounting days, I moved it all into an irrevocable setup for Levi's education and future, ensuring it couldn't be touched by anyone else. I documented everything: the forged loans, the hidden debts, the overvalued assets, and stored copies in a safe deposit box, plus digital backups with a trusted colleague from outside the family. Meanwhile, the small violations piled up, each one chipping away at my resolve. My mother would criticize my management style in front of staff, saying I lacked a vision, while my sister swooped in for photo ops at successful events, posting on social media as if she ran the place. My husband started staying out late, claiming networking, but I suspected more when I found receipts for dinners and gifts that weren't for me. My best friend, Monica Pierce, who'd known me since high school, listened to my vents over coffee, but little things felt off, like how details I'd shared would come back to me through family gossip. Then there was my cousin, Lily Hayes, a new addition to the mix. She'd moved to Salt Lake from out of state a couple years back and quickly aligned with my mother, helping with marketing but always undermining my ideas, in meetings whispering that I was holding the business back. And our family friend, Daniel Miller, a local supplier we'd worked with for years, started hinting at unpaid bills, putting me in awkward positions where I'd cover from my own pocket to keep relationships intact. The pressure built gradually, like snow accumulating before an avalanche. One evening, after a particularly grueling wedding catering job where everything went wrong, delayed deliveries, undercooked entrees, my mother called a family meeting at the house. My sister was there, of course, with her perfect manicure and stories of her latest vacation, while my husband sat quietly, avoiding my eyes. My uncle joined via video, looking uncomfortable, and my cousin showed up uninvited, claiming she had ideas to share. Daniel wasn't there, but his recent email about outstanding payments hung over the conversation like a shadow. My mother started by praising my sister's fresh perspective, then turned to me with that steely gaze I'd known all my life. Stella, we've decided it's time for you to step up fully, she said, her voice laced with that cutting sarcasm she reserved for when she thought I was slacking. You'll take primary ownership of the business, sign the transfer papers, assume the loans, and turn this around. Your sister has her own life, and it's only fair since you've been so involved. My sister chimed in right after her words, sharp as a knife. Yeah, sis, you've always been the workhorse, might as well own the stable. The room laughed lightly, but it stung, reducing my years of sacrifice to a punchline. My husband stayed silent, his agreement implicit in the way he nodded along, not defending me even when my cousin added, "It's logical. You're the one who knows the ins and outs, Stella. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The guilt trip followed how my grandmother would want the family to stay united, how refusing would tear us apart. Inside, I boiled with the knowledge of the debts they'd hidden, the forgeries that could ruin my credit if pursued. But I held back, feeling the weight of being the scapegoat yet again, the one expected to fix their messes while they walked free. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone in the office staring at the transfer documents they'd left behind. The small print outlined assuming all liabilities, but they had no idea I already knew what that meant. Hundreds of thousands in red ink vendors circling banks calling. Part of me wanted to scream to expose it all right then, but another part, the patient one, honed from years of being overlooked, whispered to wait. Levi came in his 12-year-old face, confused by the tension he'd sensed at dinner. "Mom, why do they always push everything on you?" he asked, hugging me briefly before heading to bed. His words lingered, fueling my resolve to protect us both, no matter the cost. The next few weeks turned into a series of escalating demands. My mother called daily, pressuring me to sign, gaslighting me with reminders of how I'd always been the responsible one. My sister texted snide messages like, "Don't let your ego ruin the family legacy," while my cousin posted subtle digs on the company social media, highlighting my sister's contributions in ways that minimized mine. My husband distanced himself further, spending more time at his own failing ventures, and when I confided in Monica, she seemed oddly sympathetic toward my mother's side, saying maybe it was my turn to shine. Even Daniel pulled me aside at a supply pickup, warning that if I didn't stabilize things soon, he'd have to cut ties, another jab at my supposed mismanagement. One afternoon, as I reviewed the latest bank statement showing yet another unauthorized draw on a line of credit, the reality hit harder. This wasn't just about the business. It was emotional coercion making me feel obligated to save them from their own recklessness. I met with my lawyer, Diana Perez, a sharp woman from a local firm I'd connected with through past contracts laying out the evidence of forgeries and debts. She advised fighting it, but I hesitated knowing a battle would drag Levi through the mud. Instead, I focused on shielding what mattered, transferring my personal savings into the trust ensuring Levi's future was secure. The violations kept coming, small but relentless. My mother borrowed company funds for my sister's new car, claiming it was for client meetings, then blamed me when the account dipped low. My cousin organized a staff meeting without me implementing changes that ignored my input, and when I pushed back, my mother dismissed it as jealousy. My husband finally revealed his piece during a quiet dinner at home. He'd been seeing someone, Reese Caldwell, a younger woman from his networking circles, and he wanted out, but only after ensuring the business debts wouldn't drag him down. Debts he'd helped accrue with those co-signed loans he'd never mentioned. The betrayal stacked up, leaving me isolated even in my own marriage. By the end of that month, the family gathered again, this time at the warehouse, with my uncle in person looking grave. My mother pushed the final papers toward me, her voice dripping with false concern. "Sign it, Stella. It's for the good of everyone." My sister smirked, my cousin nodded eagerly, and my husband stood by, silent as ever. I stared at those papers for what felt like an eternity, the warehouse lights buzzing overhead like a swarm of angry bees, while my family waited expectantly, their eyes on me like I was the one holding up some grand procession. With the steady hand that belied the storm inside, I picked up the pen and signed, feeling the ink seal, a path I knew would lead to revelations they couldn't foresee, even as my mother's satisfied smile spread across her face. She patted my shoulder, then, as if I'd just aced a test she'd set up for failure, saying, "See, that wasn't so hard. Now we can all move forward without the drama." My sister leaned in with a smirk that could curdle milk, adding her own jab. "Finally stepping up, little sis. Maybe now you'll appreciate what mom's been carrying all these years." My cousin, ever the eager sidekick, chimed in about how this would streamline operations, her words laced with that false enthusiasm that made me want to roll my eyes while my husband just shifted his weight, murmuring something about it being for the best. My uncle cleared his throat awkwardly from the corner, his face etched with lines of concern he didn't voice. And I caught a glimpse of doubt in his eyes that mirrored my own hidden knowledge. The transfer was official now, or so they thought, the business and all its entanglements shifting to my name alone, a burden they were all too happy to offload while pretending it was a gift. In the days that followed, the weight of that signature settled in like a fog over the Wasatch foothills, thickening with each new demand that came my way. My mother wasted no time calling the next morning to instruct me on priorities, insisting I use personal funds to cover an upcoming vendor payment that she'd conveniently overlooked in the books. "It's your company now, Stella?" she said over the phone, her tone sharp as a paring knife. "So handle it like the responsible one you've always claimed to be." I bit back a retort, knowing confrontation too soon would tip my hand, but the sarcasm in her voice stung, reducing my years of loyalty to a punchline she delivered without a second thought. My sister followed up with an email CC'd to everyone listing suggestions for cost cutting that suspiciously spared her occasional involvement, while slashing staff hours I'd fought to maintain. "Don't be sentimental about the little people," she wrote, her words dripping with that entitled edge she'd honed over years of being the favored one. My husband's distance grew into a chasm during those weeks, his late nights turning into full absences. And when I finally cornered him in our kitchen one evening after Levi had gone to bed, he admitted the affair with Reese in a flat, unapologetic tone that hit like a dull thud. "She's uncomplicated, Stella, no family baggage, no endless work talk," he said, avoiding my gaze as he packed a bag, his jab landing squarely on the life we'd built together. He wanted a clean break, he claimed, but only after ensuring the business debts wouldn't drag him down, debts he'd helped accrue with those co-signed loans he'd never mentioned. I stood there at the counter, digging into my back, feeling the isolation creep in as he walked out the door without a backward glance, leaving me to explain to Levi why Dad wouldn't be at breakfast anymore. My son, with his wide eyes and questions that pierced sharper than any adult's words, hugged me tight that night, whispering, "We'll be okay, Mom, right?" A heartbreaking prompt in our daily life, forcing me to nod while wondering how deep the fallout would go. Monica's calls came more frequently, too, her voice laced with that overly sweet concern that now set my teeth on edge. "How are you holding up with all this responsibility?" she'd ask, but then slip in questions about the business finances or my plans details that somehow made their way back to my mother in twisted forms. I tested it once, mentioning a fictional vendor dispute, and sure enough, my sister referenced it at our next family check-in, her smirk confirming what I'd suspected my best friend had become, their informant bought with flattery or promises I didn't want to imagine. "You always were too trusting," my sister said during that call, her psychological jab twisting the knife as if my vulnerabilities were fair game in their game of control. My cousin ramped up her interference at work, reorganizing schedules without input, and crediting herself in client emails, her actions a constant erosion of my authority that my mother dismissed as teamwork. Even Daniel, Our longtime supplier started hesitating on deliveries, citing payment concerns that stemmed from the very debts now solely in my lap, his reluctant words adding another layer of professional isolation. As the pressures mounted, I found myself unraveling in quiet ways, sleepless nights poring over the documents I'd hidden, confirming the extent of the forgeries and the ballooning interest that could bankrupt anyone without a safety net. My health took hits too. Headaches turned into migraines, and I missed a key client meeting because of it, only for my mother to call and scold me like a child. If you can't handle the heat, maybe you shouldn't have signed. She snapped her sarcasm, a fresh wound that made me clench the phone until my knuckles whitened. I confided bits to my uncle over coffee one afternoon, his face paling as I showed him snippets of the evidence. But he urged caution, saying family bonds were fragile. Yet his own hesitation felt like another abandonment, leaving me to navigate the minefield alone. The turning point crept up during a staff appreciation dinner we'd hosted at a local venue, meant to boost morale amid the changes. My mother arrived unannounced, pulling me aside mid-event to demand I approve a new loan for equipment. Upgrades, her voice low, but cutting in front of lingering employees. "Don't embarrass us by dragging your feet," she hissed, her contempt bare for a moment before she plastered on a smile for the room. My sister and cousin flanked her, echoing the pressure with veiled threats about reputational damage if I didn't comply, while my husband texted from afar asking if I'd sorted the separation yet. As if our marriage was just another line item. Levi, who'd come along to help set up, overheard enough to ask later why Grandma always seemed mad at me, his innocent question hanging like a storm cloud. That night, back in the quiet of our half-empty house, I met with Diana again, spreading out the binders of proof on my dining table. She reviewed them methodically, her expression shifting from sympathy to strategy, as she outlined options contesting the transfer, exposing the forgeries, potentially suing for fraud. "You've got them cornered if you want to fight," she said, but the weariness in my bones whispered otherwise. A battle would consume years, drag Levi through courts, and shatter what little family illusion remained. Instead, I chose a quieter path, instructing her to prepare dissolution papers for the business, liquidating assets to cover debts while protecting my personal shield. The trust for Levi remained untouchable, a beacon in the chaos. The escalations didn't stop there. My mother ramped up the emotional coercion, showing up at the house with my sister in tow boxes, in hand as if to help reorganize my life now that my husband was gone. "You're better off focusing on the business anyway," she said, rifling through drawers with that invasive familiarity, her jab at my failed marriage landing like salt in an open wound. My cousin called with updates on social media campaigns, but her tone carried undertones of sabotage, hinting at rumors she'd heard about my instability. Monica's betrayal solidified when she accidentally forwarded an email meant for my mother detailing my venting sessions, words twisted to paint me as ungrateful, unstable. Daniel finally cut ties his email a professional but pointed farewell that left us scrambling for new suppliers mid-season. By the end of that grueling month, the isolation felt complete. My once supportive network reduced to echoes of judgment and expectation. I stood in the warehouse alone one evening, staring at the sign "Transfer," now framed by stacks of overdue notices, when my uncle called unexpectedly, his voice grave, with news he'd uncovered independently, more hidden accounts, deeper debts tied to my mother's personal ventures. "Stella, this goes beyond what you told me," he said, pausing as if weighing his next words carefully. His paws stretched across the line, heavy with the kind of hesitation that comes from uncovering rot in the foundation of something you thought was solid. There's personal guarantees tied to those loans, not just business ones, but ones pulling in family assets, including some old properties grandmother left in trust. He finally continued, his voice dropping to a whisper as if the walls could hear. I gripped the phone tighter, the cold metal an anchor against the surge of confirmation that this web went deeper, ensnaring more than I'd mapped out in my binders. My uncle had always been the quiet observer, the one who balanced books without fanfare. But now his words carried a warning edge, hinting at layers of deception that could drag us all under if I didn't act soon. Stella, you need to protect yourself first, he urged before hanging up with a promise to send over what he'd found, leaving me staring at the shadowed stacks of crates, the silence amplifying the ticking clock of impending collapse. The next morning brought no relief, just a barrage of texts from my mother, each one sharper than the last, demanding updates on the loan approval she'd pushed for. Don't make me regret handing this over to you. She wrote, her digital jab landing like a reminder of every time she'd favored my sister over my warnings. I responded curtly, buying time, but inside the isolation gnawed deeper. Levi at school, my husband gone. Monica's loyalty fractured, and now even the business allies like Daniel pulling away. My cousin emailed next, attaching a revised marketing plan that conveniently allocated budget to her ideas while cutting mine, her note laced with passive aggression. Assuming you're on board since you're the boss now, let's not drop the ball. My sister called in the afternoon, her voice sugary sweet at first, then turning pointed when I hedged on committing more funds. Come on, sis. Mom's counting on you not to screw this up like you did with that last expansion flop, she said, twisting history to paint me as the failure, her psychological prod, pushing me closer to the edge I'd been skirting. I met Diana at her office that evening, a small suite downtown with views of the city lights flickering on like distant judgments. She spread my uncle's new documents alongside mine, her fingers tracing the forged signatures that now included not just loans, but liens on family heirlooms I'd thought safe. This is fraud, plain and simple, she said firmly, outlining a plan to contest the transfer, quietly transferring liabilities back while shielding my personal assets. But as she spoke, the high stakes loomed larger, the potential for family lawsuits, public exposure of the debts that could tarnish my grandmother's name, and the emotional toll on Levi, who was already withdrawing, spending more time in his room, sketching escapes from our fracturing world. I nodded along, but a quieter decision formed, not full war, but strategic retreat, setting boundaries that would sever ties without the spectacle of victory. Over the following weeks, the coercions escalated into a relentless rhythm, each one a test of my resolve. My mother showed up at the warehouse unannounced with my sister and cousin in tow, inspecting operations like auditors on a mission. We've heard from sources that things are slipping, vendors complaining, staff morale down. My mother announced in front of a few lingering employees, her accusation hanging in the air like an ultimatum. My sister piled on with a smirk. Maybe if you delegated more instead of hoarding control, we wouldn't be in this mess. Her words a direct hit at my dedication, while my cousin nodded vigorously, adding, I've got contacts who could help, but only if you're serious about turning this around. I stood my ground calmly, suggesting we discuss privately, but inside the social isolation bit, hard, no allies in the room, no husband to deflect, just me, against their united front. Later, Monica texted an invitation to coffee, but I declined. Her betrayal still fresh, leaving another thread of connection snapped. Levi noticed the shifts, his questions coming in quiet moments over dinner. Why Grandma hadn't visited, why Aunt Sharon's calls went unanswered. Are we fighting them all? He asked one night, his fork pausing mid-bite, forcing me to choose words, carefully explaining that sometimes families need space to heal, without admitting the wounds might never close. My husband filed for divorce shortly after demanding his share of marital assets tied to the business. His lawyer's letter, a cold jab that ignored his role in the mess. Diana countered swiftly, using the evidence to negotiate him out clean but with nothing extra, a small boundary that felt like drawing a line in sand against a tide. The climax built during a family holiday gathering at the old house, the one with those hidden mortgages now mine to unravel. My mother hosted, insisting on my attendance for Levi's sake, turning it into a stage for more pressure. As we sat around the table, she raised a toast to new beginnings, then leaned in toward me with that familiar disdain. Now that you've got the reins, when are you paying off those outstanding notes? Your sister needs funds for her project, she said, her demand wrapped in familial obligation, eyes daring me to refuse in front of everyone. My sister laughed lightly, adding, "Yeah, don't hoard it all, family shares, right?" While my cousin whispered something to my uncle that made him shift uncomfortably. I set down my glass, the clink echoing like a gavel, and spoke evenly. Actually, I've decided to liquidate the business, sell off assets, pay down debts, and close shop. It's unsustainable, and I'm done carrying it alone. The room erupted in protests, my mother's face twisting in rage as she accused me of betrayal, her voice rising to a pitch that shattered the facade. After everything I've done, you ungrateful girl, this is how you repay me. She spat her contempt finally bare for all to see while my sister jumped in with, "You're destroying grandmother's legacy out of spite." My cousin tried to mediate but sided with them, her words a feeble jab at my selfishness. My uncle stayed silent at first, then quietly supported my assessment, revealing bits of what he'd found, but the damage was done. The lines drawn me on one side, them on the other. My husband, who'd shown up for appearances, just shook his head, muttering about complications for the divorce. In the aftermath, I followed through with Diana's guidance. The business sold in pieces. Debts settled at a loss that hit them hardest since they'd pushed the transfer. My mother cut contact first, sending a final text laced with guilt. "You've isolated yourself from family hope. It's worth it." My sister blocked me on everything. My cousin vanished back to her circles, and Monica's attempts at reconciliation fell flat when I didn't respond. My husband finalized the divorce, taking his freedom, but leaving me with custody of Levi and the quiet house now free of echoes. Months later, I started small, a freelance event planning gig from home, using skills honed over years without the family's shadow. Levi adjusted slowly, our bond strengthening in the silence, left by absences, but the loneliness lingered like a constant companion, evenings stretching long without calls or visits. My uncle checked in occasionally, a thin thread to the past, but Daniel and others moved on, the professional ties severed. I set those boundaries not for revenge, but survival, walking away with self-respect intact, yet alone in a world I'd reshaped. Thank you for staying with me through this story of tangled family expectations and the hard choice to step back. If you've ever had to draw lines with your own family, even if it meant standing alone, share in the comments. What was the moment that made you choose yourself? I'd love to hear and learn from your experiences.